He hadn't seen a woman in decades. Then 6 beautiful strangers knelt at his ranch. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's begin the story. The wind howled across the vast, empty plains of the West, carrying with it the dust and the heavy silence that had filled this ranch for decades. Out here, life had slowed to a crawl, as though time itself had forgotten this corner of the world. The sun was low, casting long shadows across the land, and a solitary figure moved slowly through the fading light. This was Thaddeus Whitmore, a man who had known the taste of loss all too well. Decades ago, he had lost his family, and in the years that followed, he had chosen solitude. His ranch, once a thriving piece of land, had become a testament to the passing of time, its buildings weathered and worn, its fields untended. It was as if the world had moved on, leaving him behind. He had not seen a woman in years. No one had come to visit, and no one had ever stayed. Thaddeus had long ago accepted his loneliness as his only companion, and for the most part, he preferred it that way. He had no need for the company of others, not after everything he had been through. But one evening, as the sun sank behind the mountains and the stars began to emerge in the clear sky, something unusual happened. Thaddeus was sitting outside, staring out at the land he had come to call his own, when he heard the faint sound of horses approaching. His brow furrowed in confusion. No one ever came here, especially not at this hour. He rose from his seat and squinted into the distance. 6 figures on horseback were making their way toward his ranch, their silhouettes growing clearer with each passing second. At first, Thaddeus thought it was a group of travelers passing through, but as they drew closer, he noticed something that made his heart skip a beat. There were women among them. His mind raced. Women? It had been decades since he had seen a woman, let alone 6 of them. As they approached, he could make out their faces, beautiful, strong, and determined, their eyes set with purpose. The horses came to a stop just in front of his cabin, and the riders dismounted with fluid grace. Thaddeus stood frozen, unsure of what to do or say. Before he could react, the women did something that left him completely speechless. They knelt. One by one, they dropped to their knees in front of him, their heads bowed in reverence. Thaddeus stood there, speechless and bewildered, as the wind whipped around them. The silence was deafening. Why were they here? And why were they kneeling? What had brought them to his ranch after all these years? The questions swirled in his mind, but before he could ask, the woman who seemed to be the leader of the group slowly rose and stepped forward. Her eyes met his, and for the first time in years, Thaddeus felt something stir deep inside him. This was not a visit for casual reasons. These women, with their quiet dignity and strength, were here for something far more profound. And as they stood in front of him, Thaddeus had no idea just how much his life was about to change. The woman who stepped forward from the group of riders looked at Thaddeus with a gaze that was both intense and familiar. Her eyes, dark and full of quiet strength, seemed to peer straight into his soul. She had an air of authority, yet there was something about her that softened the harshness of her presence. Thaddeus could not understand why they were here, nor why they had chosen to approach him after all these years of silence and isolation. As she approached, the other women stood back, giving her space. She was clearly their leader, the one who had guided them to this remote ranch in the first place. The silence stretched between them, heavy and thick, like the air just before a storm. Thaddeus cleared his throat, trying to find his voice after what felt like an eternity. "Why have you come?" he asked, his voice rough from years of solitude. The woman did not hesitate. "We have come to honor you," she said simply, her voice carrying a weight of meaning that Thaddeus could not fully comprehend. "You saved us, long ago, when no one else would." The words hit him like a thunderclap, though he didn't know how to react. He had saved people? It had been so long since he had done anything for anyone, let alone saved lives. His mind raced as fragments of the past began to resurface. There were flashes of memories, faces of people he had helped, people who had once been strangers, but the details were hazy, distant. The woman continued, as though reading his thoughts. You may not remember us, she said, but we remember you. We remember what you did for us when we were at our lowest. You risked your life for ours, and we owe you more than words can say. Thaddeus shook his head in disbelief. I don't understand, he murmured. I haven't seen anyone in years. How could you possibly? We came looking for you. The woman interrupted gently. And we found you, just as we promised we would. She paused for a moment, as though gathering her thoughts. I am Maya, she said, and these are my sisters. We are here because, all those years ago, you gave us hope. You showed us that there was still kindness in the world, even in the darkest of times. We have come to repay that kindness. The other women nodded in unison, their faces a mixture of determination and respect. Thaddeus felt a strange warmth spreading through him, a feeling he had not known in many years. He had lived so long in isolation, numbed by the weight of his past, that he had forgotten what it felt like to be seen, to be remembered. Maya and her sisters had found him, not because they needed something, but because they wanted to give something back, something he never expected. I never asked for anything, Thaddeus said softly, looking down at the dusty ground beneath his boots. I didn't save anyone to be repaid. Maya stepped closer, her voice firm yet kind. You didn't save us for reward. But sometimes, the kindness you show to others comes back when you least expect it. We have come to help you, just as you once helped us. Thaddeus swallowed hard, feeling a lump form in his throat. He had spent so many years trying to forget, trying to move past the loss and the pain. And now, these 6 women had returned, offering him something he had long thought lost: connection, humanity, and the chance for redemption. The wind picked up again, carrying with it the scent of pine and earth, and for the first time in years, Thaddeus felt a flicker of hope. Perhaps, just perhaps, the silence of his life was about to break. As Maya and her sisters began to speak of the ways they could help him rebuild the ranch, Thaddeus could not help but listen intently. He had spent decades alone, but now, with these strangers who had become his saviors, he felt something stirring deep within him. The years of solitude, the pain of the past, began to feel like a distant memory. These women were here to give him a future, not just a past to mourn. And as he looked at them, he realized that the life he had once thought was over was only just beginning. The following days passed in a strange haze, as though time itself had blurred and reshaped around the arrival of Maya and her sisters. Thaddeus found himself strangely unsettled, unsure of how to proceed with these women who had come into his life so suddenly. For so many years, he had been the one to keep to himself, to ignore the outside world. And now, the outside world had found him, in the form of these 6 women who were eager to help him rebuild not only his ranch but the life he had long abandoned. The sun had barely risen when Maya approached him one morning. She stood tall in the early light, her posture straight, her eyes filled with quiet determination. We've been working the land for days, Thaddeus, she said, her voice firm yet gentle. There's much to be done, but we need your guidance. Thaddeus stood up from the porch where he had been sitting, a cup of coffee in his hands. For the first time in many years, he felt a stir of responsibility inside him. These women weren't just visitors. They were partners, and if he was honest with himself, they were also a reminder of a life he had almost forgotten how to live. What do you need from me? Thaddeus asked, his voice hoarse, as though it had been unused for far too long. Maya smiled, a small but meaningful gesture. We need your expertise, she said. The land is vast, but it's been neglected. We're starting from scratch in some ways, but with your knowledge, we can make this place thrive again. The words hit him with an unexpected force. This wasn't just about survival. This was about rebuilding, about making something new from the ashes of his past. And for the first time in years, Thaddeus felt the stirring of hope. He walked with Maya and the others to the barn where they had already begun sorting through tools and materials. The work was tough, but it was familiar. Thaddeus had spent most of his life working the land, and even though his hands had grown rough with age, they still knew how to wield a shovel, a hammer, a plow. As he worked alongside Maya and the others, he felt the tension of his solitary years slowly begin to fade. It was strange, this feeling of being needed again. It was as though the world, which had once seemed so distant, had suddenly drawn close. As the days passed, more changes began to take shape. The land, which had once been parched and overgrown, started to show signs of life. The crops began to sprout in the fields, and the once barren barn was filled with animals that Maya and her sisters had brought with them. The once empty spaces in Thaddeus's life were now filled with the sounds of voices, laughter, and the rhythm of hard work. Yet, even as the land began to come alive, Thaddeus couldn't shake the feeling that something more was happening here. These women, with their quiet strength and determination, were not just here to help him rebuild his ranch. They were here to help him rebuild something much deeper: his faith in the world, his ability to trust, and perhaps even his capacity to care again. One evening, as they sat around the fire, Maya spoke up. Her voice, soft but steady, broke the comfortable silence that had settled over the group. "We have been through so much to get here," she said, looking at each of her sisters with a sense of pride. "And now, we are here to repay the man who gave us hope when we had none." Thaddeus felt a lump form in his throat at the words. It was hard to accept such gratitude, especially when he didn't feel like he had done anything to deserve it. "I didn't do much," he muttered, feeling the weight of the past years pressing down on him. "I just did what anyone would do in that situation." Maya looked at him, her gaze piercing and kind at the same time. "No, Thaddeus," she said gently. "What you did was more than anyone else would have. You gave us something that no one else could: your kindness, your protection. And for that, we will always be grateful." Thaddeus looked down at the fire, the flames dancing in the dark. He didn't know how to respond. For so many years, he had lived in a world where he had to protect himself from others, where kindness was a luxury he could not afford. But now, with these women, he was learning that kindness could be something that not only healed others, but also healed him. The fire crackled, and for the first time in a long while, Thaddeus felt at peace. He had built walls around his heart for so long, but now, those walls were starting to come down. The silence that had once filled his life was now replaced with the sound of laughter, of work being done, of a future being created. He was no longer alone, and for the first time in many years, he felt like he belonged. And perhaps, just perhaps, there was still a chance for him to be the man he once was, the man who had saved others and, in doing so, had saved himself. Days passed, and the rhythm of life on the ranch began to settle into something that felt almost normal. Thaddeus had never imagined that he would find himself here, working alongside Maya and her sisters, rebuilding not just the land, but his own sense of purpose. The once dusty fields were beginning to show signs of life. The barn was filled with animals, and the old cabin that had once felt so empty was now filled with the sounds of people, laughter, conversation, and the everyday hum of a life being lived. But even as the work progressed, there was a quiet tension in the air. Something was coming. It had been weeks since the women's arrival, and while Thaddeus had slowly grown accustomed to their presence, there was still the lingering question of why they had truly come. They had helped him with the land, with the farm, but there was more to their visit than mere gratitude. Thaddeus could feel it, as though there was something they weren't telling him. One afternoon, as the sun began to dip low in the sky, casting long shadows over the fields, Maya approached him again. She was holding something in her hands, a weathered piece of leather, worn from use, but still strong. "Thaddeus," she said quietly, her voice serious, "there's something you need to see." Thaddeus looked at her, his curiosity piqued. He had grown accustomed to Maya's strength, her calm presence. But this was different. She was not the confident leader he had come to know, but a woman who seemed burdened by something she had not yet shared. Maya handed him the leather pouch. As he took it, he felt the weight of it, not just physically but emotionally. Inside the pouch was something small, a piece of jewelry, a silver pendant, intricately carved with symbols he did not recognize. The moment he touched it, a flood of memories rushed back to him, memories he had long buried. He had seen this pendant before. It was not just any piece of jewelry. This was something from his past, something that connected him to a time he had tried to forget. Maya's eyes met his, and for the first time, there was a vulnerability in her gaze. "This was your father's," she said softly. "You gave it to my mother, many years ago, when she was lost and alone." The words hit him like a punch to the gut. His father? He had no memory of ever giving a pendant to anyone, let alone to someone who was connected to Maya and her people. "My father," Thaddeus echoed, his voice thick with confusion. "But how?" Maya nodded. as though she had expected the question. Your father saved my mother, Thaddeus. He saved her life when she was just a girl, alone in the wilderness, in danger from those who would have hurt her. Your father took her in, protected her, and in return, she gave him this pendant as a token of her gratitude. Thaddeus stood there, stunned, as the weight of Maya's words sank in. His father, a man who had always been a mystery to him, had been a protector, a man who had shown kindness when no one else would. It was hard to believe, especially now, in the quiet years that had followed his death. But Maya's words had a ring of truth to them. Thaddeus's mind raced, trying to piece together the fragments of his past that had been lost to time. His father had always been a quiet man, a man of few words, and even fewer connections with the outside world. But now, this revelation was changing everything. Why are you telling me this now? Thaddeus asked, his voice hoarse. Maya hesitated, as though weighing her words carefully. Because your father's actions have rippled through time, Thaddeus. His kindness, his protection of my mother, that was the beginning. And now, it is time for us to repay that debt. Thaddeus looked at the pendant in his hand, feeling its weight, feeling the connection to his father in a way he never had before. It was as though the past had come crashing back into his present, reshaping everything he thought he knew about his family, about his father, and about the legacy that had been left behind. Repay? Thaddeus asked, his mind struggling to understand. But I didn't do anything. You did, Maya interrupted, her voice firm but kind. You are the one who saved us, Thaddeus. You gave us the same hope and protection your father gave my mother. And now, we are here to help you, to repay that debt. This land, this ranch, it's not just about rebuilding what was lost. It's about creating something new, something that honors the kindness that started it all. Thaddeus stood there for a moment, looking down at the pendant in his hand, feeling the weight of its significance. It was more than just a piece of jewelry. It was a symbol of everything he had lost and everything he had yet to find. And in that moment, he understood. This was not just about the land, or the ranch, or the years that had passed. This was about family, about connection, about the power of kindness and how it could change lives, not just in the past, but in the present, too. With a deep breath, Thaddeus looked at Maya, his eyes filled with a newfound understanding. Then let's finish what my father started, he said softly. Maya nodded, her expression one of quiet resolve. Together, and for the first time in many years, Thaddeus felt the weight of his past not as a burden, but as a foundation, something solid to build upon. As the sun dipped below the horizon, he knew that the future was waiting for him, waiting for them all. The days following Thaddeus's revelation were filled with a renewed sense of purpose. The weight of his father's past, the kindness that had been passed down to him, now felt like a foundation on which to build something greater. As Maya and the others worked tirelessly alongside him, the ranch began to transform. The land that had once been barren and forgotten was now showing the first signs of life. The crops were growing, animals filled the barn, and the air seemed to hum with the energy of hard work and hope. But even as progress was made, Thaddeus couldn't shake the feeling that something else was coming, something he hadn't yet anticipated. One evening, as the sun began to set and the sky turned a fiery orange, Maya gathered everyone around the fire. The other women sat in a quiet circle, their faces serious. Thaddeus, still adjusting to the presence of these women in his life, looked around the fire, sensing the tension in the air. Maya spoke first, her voice calm but resolute. We've been working hard to restore this place, Thaddeus, she said, looking at him with a steady gaze. But there are things that are out of our control. There are forces in this land, forces that would rather see us fail. Thaddeus's heart skipped a beat. He had always known that the land, though beautiful, could be unforgiving. But he had never imagined that there were others who might want to tear down what they had worked so hard to rebuild. What do you mean? He asked, his voice low. Maya's expression hardened. There are men who want this land, she said. Men who think they can take it from us, just like they've taken from others before. They won't stop until they have it, and they'll do anything to make sure we don't succeed. The realization hit Thaddeus like a punch in the gut. He had been so focused on rebuilding his life and his ranch that he had not considered the possibility of opposition. The quiet that had settled over his life had been shattered, and now, the threat of violence loomed over them all. The Wind picked up, rustling the leaves of the nearby trees, as if to echo the tension in the air. Thaddeus stood up, his fists clenched. "We won't let them take it," he said, his voice filled with determination. Maya stood as well, her eyes meeting his. "No," she agreed, her tone firm. "We won't, but we need to be ready. We need to stand together, not just as a family, but as a force they cannot break." Thaddeus nodded, the weight of the situation sinking in. It wasn't just about the ranch anymore. It was about everything he had rebuilt in his life, the hope, the connections, and the promise of a future. He had come to realize that his father's legacy was not just about kindness, but about fighting for what was rightfully his. As the days passed, the threat of outside forces grew clearer. Thaddeus and Maya worked together to strategize, preparing for what was to come. The other women, strong and capable, began training with the tools and weapons they had gathered. They were not just caretakers of the land anymore. They were warriors, ready to defend what they had built. It was a strange and unfamiliar feeling for Thaddeus, but one he couldn't deny. He was no longer the man he had been all those years ago, the man who had buried himself in isolation. He had a purpose now, a reason to fight, and people who depended on him. The quiet ranch that had once been a place of solitude had become a battleground, and Thaddeus was ready to defend it. One night, as the full moon rose high in the sky, Thaddeus stood at the edge of the property, looking out over the land. The wind was cool against his face, and the stars above seemed brighter than he had ever seen them. For a moment, he allowed himself to remember what it had been like before, the isolation, the emptiness. But now, with Maya and the others by his side, he felt something he hadn't felt in years, belonging. He wasn't alone anymore. And no matter what came, he would face it with the strength of those around him. The silence of his past had been replaced by the sounds of life, of voices, and of a future that was still being written. And Thaddeus knew, deep in his heart, that he would fight for it with everything he had. The days turned into weeks, and the tension that had settled over the ranch grew palpable. Thaddeus, Maya, and the other women worked tirelessly, preparing for whatever was to come. They built fences, reinforced the barn, and secured the land. But despite their hard work, the looming threat from those who wanted to take their land never left their minds. The distant rumble of hooves in the night was enough to remind them that danger was always just over the horizon. Thaddeus, though once a man of isolation and quiet, now felt the weight of leadership settling on his shoulders. He had been through so much in his life, yet this new chapter was different. It was no longer about survival. It was about protecting what he had rebuilt. His bond with Maya and the other women had deepened, and now they were a team, a family. They had been through the trials together, and Thaddeus knew they would face whatever came next, together. One evening, as the sun dipped below the mountains, painting the sky with streaks of orange and purple, a messenger arrived at the ranch. He was a rider from a nearby town, his horse covered in sweat and dust. He rode up to Thaddeus, his eyes wide with urgency. "You need to prepare," the rider said breathlessly. "There are men coming. They're gathering in the town. They'll be here by morning." Thaddeus felt his heart skip a beat. The moment they had been dreading was finally here. The group that had been threatening their ranch was coming for real. He turned to Maya, who had already seen the look in his eyes. She nodded, her expression hardening. "We'll be ready," she said. Thaddeus felt the fire of resolve burning inside him. There was no going back now. This wasn't just about the ranch. It was about everything he had rebuilt, the family, the life, the hope that had slowly crept back into his heart. He gathered the others, and together, they devised a plan. The women were no longer just caretakers. They had become warriors in their own right. They had trained with weapons, learned the lay of the land, and prepared for the worst. Maya, who had shown herself to be a natural leader, took charge of the defense. Thaddeus, though older and more experienced in matters of survival, followed her lead. They worked through the night, setting up barricades, positioning themselves in strategic spots, and sharpening their weapons. It was a night of tension, but also a night of determination. By the time the first light of dawn broke over the mountains, they were ready. Thaddeus stood at the edge of the ranch, looking out over the land. The early morning mist hung heavy in the air, and the silence felt almost unnatural. He could hear the faint sound of hooves in the distance, but he didn't flinch. He had come to realize that this was the moment. This was his fight. As the hours passed, the men arrived, just as the messenger had said. They came in a group of 10, armed and ready for a fight. Thaddeus watched them approach, his heart pounding in his chest. The men stopped at the edge of the property, sizing up the ranch. They were clearly not expecting much resistance. Their leader, a tall man with a rough face and a scar running down his cheek, stepped forward. "This land belongs to us now," the man called out, his voice carrying across the open space. "You've had your time, old man. It's over." Thaddeus stepped forward, his jaw set and his eyes unwavering. "This land doesn't belong to you," he said, his voice calm but firm. "It belongs to me and those I protect, and we will fight for it." The leader sneered. "You think you can stop us? You're just an old man and a bunch of women. What can you possibly do?" Thaddeus didn't respond. Instead, he signaled to Maya and the others, and they positioned themselves, ready for the confrontation. The leader's expression faltered as he realized that the ranch wasn't as defenseless as he had assumed. This wasn't just a group of people hiding behind walls. This was a group of warriors, ready to defend everything they had fought for. "You've made a mistake," Thaddeus said quietly, his eyes locked on the leaders. The man hesitated, a flicker of uncertainty crossing his face. But he quickly regained his composure. "We'll see about that." With a sharp signal, the men advanced, and the battle began. The women fought with fierce determination, using their knowledge of the land to their advantage. Thaddeus, despite his age, fought with the strength of a man who had lived through years of hardship and loss. It wasn't about just defending the ranch anymore. It was about defending everything he had rebuilt, his home, his family, his future. The battle raged on, but in the end, it was clear who had the strength and resolve to protect what was theirs. The intruders, seeing that they were outmatched, retreated, their heads bowed in defeat. Thaddeus stood victorious, his heart pounding, his body bruised but unbroken. As the dust settled, he turned to Maya, who was standing beside him, her face streaked with dirt, but her eyes filled with pride. "We did it," she said, her voice steady. Thaddeus nodded, a sense of relief washing over him. "We did," he said, his heart finally at peace. They had fought for their land, for their future, and for each other. And in that moment, Thaddeus knew that he had truly found a family, one that would stand by him, no matter what came next. Weeks had passed since the battle for the ranch, and though the threat had been driven off, there was an undeniable shift in the air. The silence that had once hung over the land, a silence born from Thaddeus's solitude, had been replaced by a quiet confidence. The ranch was alive again, not just in the crops and the animals, but in the people who worked it, the people who cared for it. Maya and the others had become more than just allies. They were his family, and the bond between them had only strengthened after the battle. But even as peace settled over the land, Thaddeus knew the struggle wasn't over. There would always be those who coveted what he had rebuilt, and though they had won this battle, he could never be certain the war was finished. It was on a crisp morning, as the sun began to break over the horizon, that Thaddeus found himself standing at the edge of the land, watching as Maya approached. Her silhouette was framed by the light, and as she drew closer, he could see the determination in her eyes. "What's on your mind?" Thaddeus asked, his voice low and steady. Maya stopped beside him, gazing out over the fields they had worked so hard to restore. "We've rebuilt," she said quietly, "but we can't just sit here waiting for the next threat. There's still work to do, not just on the land, but in the hearts of the people. This ranch is ours now, but the world outside might still see us as easy targets." Thaddeus nodded, understanding her concern. The battle had been won, but it was a temporary victory. The ranch, the land, and the life they had rebuilt were still fragile. "So what do we do?" he asked, turning to face her. Maya's gaze was firm, unyielding. "We show them that we're not just a group of people trying to survive. We show them that we're strong, that we're not afraid to defend what's ours. And we make sure that the world knows what we've built here." Her words struck a chord deep within Thaddeus. He had always fought to protect his land, but now, with Maya and the others by his side, it was clear that the fight was not just about land. It was about something far more important. It was about honor, about proving that they were a family, bound not by blood, but by shared experiences and a common purpose. Over the next few days, they began preparing, not for another battle, but for something different. Thaddeus had spent so many years alone, but now, for the first time, he was part of something larger than himself. He worked with Maya and the women to expand the ranch, to improve its defenses, and to make sure that everyone, from the youngest to the oldest, had a role to play. The land was theirs, but now they had to make sure it thrived. Together, they planted more crops, built stronger fences, and started working on a network of allies, ensuring that no matter what came next, they would stand together. As they worked, the bond between them deepened, and Thaddeus found himself beginning to trust others in a way he never had before. It was not just about surviving anymore. It was about building something that would last, something that would carry forward long after they were gone. One afternoon, as they gathered around the fire to rest, Thaddeus found himself reflecting on how far they had come. The ranch had become a symbol of resilience, of what could be achieved when people came together. But there was still more to be done. "We've made this place our home," Thaddeus said quietly, looking around at the women who had become his family. "But I've realized that it's not just the land we need to protect. It's each other." Maya nodded, her expression thoughtful. "Exactly," she said. "We've fought for the land, but now we need to fight for the future. For our children, for the next generation. We can't just sit back and wait for things to happen. We have to take control of our own destiny." Thaddeus felt a sense of peace settle over him, knowing that they were no longer just surviving. They were living, building, and fighting for a future. And as he looked around the fire at the faces of the women who had become his family, he knew that they would face whatever came next, together. The world might still see them as outsiders, as people who didn't belong. But Thaddeus no longer cared about that. He had found his place in the world, and he would protect it with everything he had. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in many years, Thaddeus felt ready for whatever came next. As the weeks stretched into months, the land continued to thrive under the steady hands of Thaddeus and Maya, along with the other women who had become like family. The crops flourished, the animals grew strong, and the ranch became something more than just a piece of land. It became a symbol of resilience, a place where hope had been reborn. Yet even in the face of progress, Thaddeus couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something was still waiting to test them. The world outside the ranch was still unpredictable, and no matter how much they had built, it could all be taken away in an instant. One crisp morning, as the sun rose behind the mountains, Thaddeus stood outside, watching the mist lift from the fields. The calm of the morning was broken by the distant sound of hooves. It wasn't the sound of a lone rider, but a group, several riders approaching at speed. Thaddeus's heart raced as he scanned the horizon. Maya was the first to notice, her sharp eyes always attuned to any sign of danger. She walked up beside him, her expression unreadable. "It's them," she said quietly, her voice steady. Thaddeus knew immediately who she meant, the men who had threatened the ranch before. But this time, they weren't coming alone. They had brought reinforcements. Thaddeus didn't hesitate. "We need to get ready," he said, his voice calm despite the rising tension. He turned to Maya, his mind already racing through the preparations. "I'll take the front lines. You organize the others." Maya nodded without a word, her eyes hard with determination. The women moved quickly, gathering weapons and setting up barricades around the ranch. Thaddeus, feeling a surge of responsibility, went to the barn and grabbed his rifle, the weight of it familiar in his hands. He had fought before, and he would fight again. But this time, it wasn't just about survival. It was about defending everything they had built together. As the riders drew closer, the sense of dread in the air grew heavier. Thaddeus could see their faces now, grizzled, hardened by years of violence and greed. The leader, the man with the scar, rode at the front, his eyes locked on Thaddeus. This time, there was no negotiation, no threat of retreat. The man was determined to take the land by force. Thaddeus stood tall, his grip tightening on his rifle. "This land is ours," he called out, his voice carrying across the open ground. "You'll have to go through us to take it." The leader sneered. "We've been patient long enough," he growled. "It's time to take what's ours." With a sharp motion, he signaled his men to advance. Thaddeus didn't flinch. He knew this was coming. He had been preparing for this moment since the first day the threat had appeared. The women had trained, the land had been fortified, and now it was time to see if it would hold. As the riders came closer, the women took their positions, each one ready to defend their home. Thaddeus's heart pounded in his chest, but his resolve was unshakable. This was not just a battle for land. This was a battle for everything they had built, for the future they had carved out of nothing. The sound of hooves grew louder, and as the first rider charged forward, Thaddeus lifted his rifle and took aim. The shot rang out, echoing across the land. The rider fell, but the others continued their charge. The battle erupted into chaos as the two sides collided. Thaddeus fought with everything he had, his movements instinctive, honed by years of survival. The women fought alongside him, their strength and resolve unwavering. Maya, calm and focused, directed their efforts, keeping the defense organized and steady. For every man that fell, another took his place, but Thaddeus and his team held their ground. As the hours passed, the tide of the battle began to shift. The attackers, realizing they were outmatched, hesitated. Thaddeus saw it, doubt in their eyes, uncertainty in their actions. The women had not only defended the ranch, but they had proved something far more important. They were not just survivors. They were warriors, and they were not going to let anyone take what was theirs. The leader of the attackers, seeing the resistance they were facing, gave one final order. "Retreat," he shouted, his voice tinged with frustration. The men pulled back, retreating into the hills, leaving the ranch standing strong. Thaddeus, panting and covered in dirt and sweat, lowered his rifle. The battle was over. They had won. Maya approached him, her face streaked with dirt, but her eyes filled with pride. "We did it," she said simply, her voice steady. Thaddeus nodded, his heart still racing. "We did," he replied, his voice thick with emotion. He looked around at the women who had fought alongside him, the people who had become his family. In that moment, he realized that they had done more than defend their land. They had protected each other, and that was the true victory. As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the ranch, Thaddeus felt a deep sense of peace settle over him. The land was theirs, and they had proven they were ready to defend it, no matter the cost. They had faced the worst and come out on top. And now, more than ever, Thaddeus knew that this was where he belonged, where his future lay, with the people who stood beside him, fighting for the life they had built together. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm, golden glow across the ranch as Thaddeus stood at the edge of the property, looking out over the land he had fought so hard to protect. The battle was over. The invaders had retreated, leaving the ranch intact, and Thaddeus felt a deep sense of relief settle over him. The land was theirs, but more importantly, the life they had built was theirs to keep. Maya approached him, her footsteps soft against the ground. She had been his strength, his unwavering ally through it all. She stood beside him now, her gaze fixed on the horizon. "We did it," she said quietly, her voice steady but filled with the weight of everything they had overcome. Thaddeus nodded, his chest tight with emotion. "Yes, we did," he replied, his voice thick with gratitude. It had been a long journey, one filled with hardship and loss, but in the end, it had been worth it. He had not only regained his land, but he had also found something he never expected, a family, a purpose, and a future. The ranch, once a place of solitude and pain, had become a home, a place where he was no longer alone, where he was surrounded by people who cared for him and fought alongside him. As he looked around at the women who had become his family, his heart swelled with pride. They were not just survivors. They were warriors, strong and unyielding, and together, they had proven that no one could take what was theirs. Maya turned to him, her expression soft but resolute. "This is just the beginning, Thaddeus," she said. "We've fought for this land, but now we need to build for the future. We need to make sure that what we've created here lasts. For all of us, for the generations to come." Thaddeus took a deep breath, feeling the weight of her words settle in his chest. The battle for the ranch had been just one chapter of their story. There was still so much to be done. But for the first time in years, Thaddeus felt ready. Ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Ready to build a future on the foundation they had created. "We will," he said, his voice firm with conviction. "We'll build it together." The next few years were filled with growth and change. The ranch flourished, and the bond between Thaddeus and his family grew stronger with each passing day. The land that had once been barren and lifeless was now a vibrant, thriving farm, producing crops that fed not only them but their neighbors as well. They had become a symbol of resilience and hope in the community, a beacon of what could be accomplished when people stood together. Thaddeus found himself surrounded by the laughter of children, the sound of workers in the fields, and the steady rhythm of life moving forward. Maya, now his equal in every sense, stood by his side as they led the ranch into its next chapter. They were no longer fighting for survival. They were thriving, building a legacy that would carry on long after they were gone. And through it all, Thaddeus never forgot the lessons he had learned. The land was not just a place to survive. It was a place to live, to love, to grow. He had found his purpose in the work, in the people he had come to care for, and in the home they had built together. One evening, as he stood on the porch of his cabin, looking out at the ranch, Thaddeus felt a deep sense of peace. The battles were behind him. The future was still uncertain, but for the first time in years, he knew that he had something worth protecting. His family, his land, his legacy. As the sun sank below the horizon, Thaddeus took one last look at the place that had once been a symbol of pain and solitude, now a place of strength and belonging. He had fought for this. He had fought for them. And in that quiet moment, he knew that the ranch would remain theirs, as long as they continued to stand together. The future was theirs to shape, and with Maya and the others by his side, he had no doubt that it would be a bright one. Immerse yourself in a captivating journey filled with resilience, courage, and the spirit of survival in these unforgettable Western stories. Follow Thaddeus, a man who has spent decades rebuilding his life on a ranch after experiencing great loss. In these Western stories, he not only defends his land, but also forms unbreakable bonds with a group of strong, determined women who fight alongside him. As they work together to restore the ranch, they encounter challenges that test their strength and unity, including threats from ruthless invaders seeking to take what is theirs. As these Western stories unfold, Thaddeus learns the true value of family, trust, and the sacrifices necessary to protect the future. Through battles, triumphs, and moments of reflection, these stories offer a powerful portrayal of the hardships and victories that define the American frontier. From the quiet mornings on the ranch to the fierce struggles against those who would tear them apart, this collection of Western stories captures the essence of what it means to fight for what you love and cherish. Each chapter reveals the deep bonds that are formed when people come together to defend their home and their loved ones. These Western stories show how, through every challenge, Thaddeus and his newfound family create a future filled with hope and determination. Their journey is a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the strength that can be found in unity. Experience these Western stories that highlight the raw and emotional struggles of life on the American frontier, where every decision could mean the difference between survival and defeat. With rich storytelling and unforgettable characters, this collection of Western stories will leave you inspired and ready to face your own challenges.